White guards tried to remove Black Marine from his son's graduation. Then 6 men stood up. What happens when a Black Marine shows up to his son's graduation and security tries to remove him just because of how he looks? What unfolded next left an entire town speechless and redefined what it means to hold your ground. Solomon Dryden brushed a speck of dust off the polished toe of his right boot and caught a glimpse of himself in the hood of his Dodge Charger. The car wasn't flashy. It was old, tired in some ways, but loved. His wife used to call it reliable with attitude, like a grumpy uncle who still brought flowers on Sundays. After she passed, he didn't keep the car because he couldn't afford a new one. He kept it because some things, like memories on wheels, hold you together when the rest of the world is doing its best to pull you apart. And today was exactly one of those days. His son's high school graduation, the day she dreamed of, the day he swore he wouldn't miss, not for anything, not for anyone. 8 hours behind the wheel from Temple to Elmridge, Texas. Could he have flown? Of course. But Solomon Dryden wasn't the type to let metal wings do his thinking for him. The road gave him time to reflect, time to hold his breath through the ache of her absence, time to feel the rhythm of Coltrane and Miles Davis pouring through static speckled speakers, telling him that as long as the jazz played, he still had a heartbeat. He didn't drive because he was old school. He drove because each mile was a silent promise. He stepped out of the car, straightened his back, and exhaled. The Marine dress uniform clung to him like armor. Metal sat aligned on his chest, not shiny tokens of office meetings or desk jobs, but earned symbols of grit, sweat, sand, and nights that never ended. Sunlight caught the brass on his belt. He knew exactly how people would look at him, and he wore it anyway. Not to impress, not to intimidate, but because today his son needed to know. His father kept his word. He walked past the school volunteers, teenagers with clipboards and awkward smiles. One of them, a wiry kid with wide eyes and a handshake full of nerves, nearly dropped his tablet when Solomon approached. Sir, third row, left side, family section," the boy stammered, like the instructions were crammed in his brain and threatened to spill out. Solomon nodded. "Appreciate it." Inside, the air was thick. School gym thick. You know the type. Too much perfume, too many folding chairs, too much ambition stuffed into a box that smelled like bleach and budget flowers. White tile floors reflected fluorescent lights like they were auditioning for a crime scene. He passed row after row of proud parents. Most turned their heads politely. A few nodded cautiously, as if unsure if he was a guest or an anomaly. He heard a whisper. Military. Then another. Marine. Solomon took his seat, slow and measured. He adjusted his belt, settled his spine, and looked up at the stage. There he was. Tyron, tall, lean, with his mama's expression, serious with a splash of mischief. That look she gave when she saw his ultrasound for the first time. Like she already knew he was going to give them both a run for their money. "Look at you," Solomon murmured. His chest tightened, not from sadness, but from the weight of everything that led to this moment. Every sacrifice, every birthday missed because duty called, every bedtime phone call cut short by noise from the base. But now all he had to do was sit and watch. That was the assignment. But of course, it was never going to be that simple. About 10 minutes after he sat down, 2 men in black polo shirts with radios clipped to their belts started walking straight toward his row. Not cops, private security. Harlan security, stitched into their sleeves like they were on some kind of mission. One was stocky, built like a pit bull who ate drywall for breakfast. The other was skinny, chewing gum with the smug detachment of someone who thought uniforms made him bulletproof. "Excuse me, sir," said Mr. Pitbull, leaning down like he was trying to reason with a bear. "We're going to need you to come with us." Solomon turned his head slowly. No tension in his jaw, no twitch in his fingers. Just calm, quiet resolve. The kind of calm you only learn by surviving things that were supposed to break you. "And why's that?" "This area is reserved," the guard said. "We got a report you may be sitting in the wrong section." Solomon pulled out his ticket, printed, folded, crisp. "Third row, left side, family section," confirmed at the door. Neither of the guards looked at it. "We're just asking you to relocate to the rear section," the skinnier one piped up. "There's space back there. It's really just a matter of appropriateness." Appropriateness. That word. That's the one they use when they want to say something else but don't got the stomach to say it out loud. That's the word they wrap around discomfort like a napkin on a broken bottle. Solomon had heard it before, in different cities, on different days, but always meaning the same thing. He leaned forward just enough to make the air tense. "Listen carefully," he said, voice even. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son get his diploma, and I'll be damned if I'm leaving this seat. I earned it, twice." One of them spoke into a shoulder mic. He didn't break eye contact. The crowd around them had started to murmur. A woman ahead of them pretended to fix her hair, but stared straight into her phone camera. Somebody was already recording. Because in the 2020s America, a camera phone is the only armor you've got when dignity's being stripped. The gum chewer stepped closer. "Sir, this isn't aggressive. We're just following procedures." "And I'm just trying to watch my son graduate," Solomon replied. "Is that procedure? Removing a black father from the front row?" The air went still. The couple behind them stopped breathing. Someone whispered, "He's got a ticket." Another voice, sharper now, "Why are they bothering him?" But the guards didn't back down. "You're disrupting the ceremony." Solomon let out a dry laugh. One of those deep, scratchy ones, like sandpaper on stone. "You have no idea how many years I've been disrupting things just by existing. I guess that's my talent now." The gum froze in mid-chew. The name tag on the skinnier one read Garvin. He was losing control. "One more word and we'll remove you." Solomon didn't blink. "Try it." Then it happened. A man in the fifth row stood, clean-shaven, eyes like a vice grip, moved closer to the aisle. Another stood up, then another. 6 men, silent, unflinching. They didn't raise fists, didn't shout, they didn't need to. Their presence said everything. They were shields in flesh, veterans just like Solomon, brothers not by blood but by battlefield. Solomon didn't turn to see them. He already knew. He had pulled one out of a burning Humvee once, carried another through mortar fire in Kandahar. These men didn't just show up, they stood up. Garvin stopped breathing for a second, looked at them, looked at Solomon, then looked down. And Solomon? He sat back down. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do in a broken world is just stay seated. Garvin ground his gum like it was the last defense he had left between him and an emotional meltdown. His eyes darted from Solomon to the 6 men now positioned across the auditorium. Like this was some tactical operation, not a high school graduation ceremony. You could practically hear the gears locking up in his brain. This was not in the Harlan security playbook. Mally, the lighter, leaner one, stood frozen with the expression of a man who just realized he had stepped straight into a puddle labeled career-ending mistake. But he was still holding on to hope, like some boss might swoop in and clean up the mess before it got any uglier. He touched his earpiece again, voice shaky. "Situation in Section 3. Yes, that one. He refuses to..." Whatever was said back came in low but sharp, and Mally swallowed like someone had just handed him a live wire. "Confirmed. We're ordered to remove him immediately." Now here's the thing, when Solomon stood up, he didn't leap or flinch or square off like someone looking for a scene. He rose slowly, deliberately, not out of fear, not out of surrender, but because sometimes standing eye to eye is the only way to remind someone that you are not a mistake in their procedure. You are a person they're going to have to reckon with. "You want to remove me?" Solomon asked, his voice soft enough to lean in for, but loud enough to silence the first 2 rows. Garvin, who just moments earlier had all the bluster of a man who thought his badge made him bulletproof, suddenly lost his rhythm. He was used to folks backing down, used to that first bark doing the trick. But this man, this black man in a full Marine dress uniform, wasn't flinching. He moved like someone who had already seen worse days, who looked at scared security staff the way you'd look at mosquitoes on a camping trip. Irritating, but nothing serious. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Mally said, and his voice was almost pleading now. "Please, sir, just relocate. It's not about you. It's protocol." Solomon tilted his head slightly, considering whether to answer with a direct truth or let the sarcasm do the talking. "Protocol? Is that what they're calling it now?" he said finally. "You've got a protocol for pulling black fathers out of family seating while their sons are on stage? That's what this is? It's not because of..." "Then what? My skin didn't match the chairs?" That landed like a rock in the middle of a still pond. A smattering of claps came from the left side. Someone whistled, sharp and fast. An older woman in a pink dress, mid-60s, hair teased into tight gray curls, snapped her head toward Garvin. "He has tickets. He's in uniform. Leave the man alone for heaven's sake." But the guards didn't budge. They stood there like kids caught red-handed, who still insisted they were innocent. And then the far auditorium door clicked open. They walked in, one by one. No fanfare, no introductions. Men in regular suits, but with eyes that told whole histories of sandstorms, parachute drops, and overnight marches through hostile country. These weren't just veterans. These were Solomon's brothers in arms. One stood near the left aisle. Another took position at the opposite end. One posted up near the exit. Together they created a silent perimeter. It wasn't aggressive. It was clear, controlled, commanding. The air changed. Garvin stepped forward, breath catching in his throat. "Is this a threat?" he asked, voice cracking just enough to betray his nerves. The first of the six, a man with a granite jaw and a beard gone mostly gray, answered without stepping forward. "It's a warning," he said. "Not for you. For common sense. We're just watching. That's all." Garvin took half a step back. He wasn't used to losing ground. His ego, that brittle fortress of badge and tone, was cracking. He glanced at Solomon again. "You're refusing a direct request to comply?" Solomon crossed his arms. "I'm refusing to dance for people who don't respect my uniform or my right to be a father." Garvin reached for Solomon's arm. Bad call. Before he could even graze fabric, one of the six moved. "Hands off." The voice didn't shout, didn't threaten. It carried the weight of 1,000 field drills. Solomon turned at the sound. "Creed?" he said, nodding slightly. "Still alive?" "Only on weekends," Creed replied. The room chuckled. Nervous, genuine. The ice broke just enough for shoulders to drop. A kid on stage whispered, "What is even happening right now?" Another graduate responded, "My dad said it's a veteran check for fools." Mally, pale now, turned on his heel. But then the gym's PA system crackled, and the voice overhead carried weight. "Attention! All seats are to remain occupied. All parents and family members with valid tickets are permitted to stay in assigned seating." Everyone froze. The voice wasn't security. It wasn't admin. It was the vice principal, gray-haired, tired, but with a look that said he'd seen more nonsense than anyone wanted to admit. He stepped up on stage, adjusting his tie. "These men have done nothing wrong," he announced into the mic, "but you, Harlan Security, have. Report to the office. Now." Garvin's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The crowd began to hiss. Not just whispers now, boos, full-on public rejection, a sound every petty tyrant fears. Solomon sat down again, calmly, as if none of it rattled him, as if defending his seat and dignity had been just another Tuesday. He laid his hands on his knees, turned his eyes back to the stage, and there he was, Tyron, tall, proud, standing in his graduation robe that looked too big but felt just right. He locked eyes with his father, smiled, not a grin, a knowing, deep smile, the kind that says, "I saw it, I saw all of it." And Solomon felt it hit him in the chest like a wave. Not anger, not fear, but relief. That maybe, just maybe, he had done it right. That sitting in that seat had meant something. He hadn't let them move him, which meant he'd shown his son how to stay put when everything in the world tries to push you away. The applause started timid, like it tiptoed into the room unsure of its welcome, but within seconds it grew into thunder. Not the kind you can silence with policy or drown with protocol. No one had announced a standing ovation, but people stood anyway, because everyone in that auditorium had just witnessed something bigger than a graduation ceremony. Much bigger. Solomon Dryden remained seated, almost as if none of it was about him. The applause, the security guards being marched out with the posture of seniors caught cheating mid-exam. The camera held steady in the back corner by a trembling teenager whispering into his phone. This is a hero." Solomon didn't need titles. He didn't need validation from strangers or viral edits on social media. He knew exactly who he was. Not for likes, not for mentions. He sat in that seat for one reason, so his son could look out from that stage and see a father who stood his ground. Not for the world, for that boy. And there he was, Tyron Dryden, at the edge of the stage now, tall, confident, not hiding from the moment, but walking straight into it. He stood still, waiting. The MC, hands shaking just a bit, voice softer than before, spoke into the microphone. "Tyron Dryden." The room held its breath. Even the air paused. Tyron moved forward. No swagger, no hesitation. His eyes locked onto his father's seat, and that's when Solomon stood. He didn't rise dramatically. He didn't raise his fists. He simply rose tall and straight and gave a salute. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but because that's what you do when you're in the presence of something truly deserving of respect. Silence swept the gym like a tide. Not one cough, not one clap, because everyone could feel it. This moment wasn't made for noise. It was made for truth. Then came the eruption. Clapping, shouts, whistles. The kind of celebration that feels real, not rehearsed. The kind of noise that clears the air like a storm after a heat wave. Somewhere in the crowd, a voice rang out, "Put that man on the screen." And like someone flipped a switch, The big projection screen over the stage flickered to life. Solomon's face filled the frame, serious, weathered, a scar on his cheek that spoke louder than any speech ever could, and eyes that had seen enough to know when a moment was more than symbolic. Then the camera panned to Tyron, young, composed, lips pressed tight, trembling just slightly. He took the diploma, and instead of walking off stage like the others, he turned to the crowd, looked straight ahead, and raised his hand in salute, not to the school, not to the principal, but to his father. That was when the man in the gray blazer stepped forward from the wings of the stage, the assistant principal, a man with a limp and the face of someone who'd seen enough young fools in his career to know when to intervene. His voice wasn't booming, but it cut through the noise clean. "Excuse me, everyone. I need just a moment." He held the microphone like it belonged in his hand, but spoke like a man who preferred silence. "There's someone in this room who deserves more than a seat in the third row. Retired Sergeant Major Solomon Dryden, father of graduate Tyron Dryden. Today you reminded us all what honor looks like." The crowd rose again, but this time slower, more deliberate. Not celebration, recognition, a quiet apology baked into every clap. Some wiped tears. Others clapped like they were trying to shake off the shame of not standing earlier. But not everyone applauded. Back near the exit, Garvin and Malley stood stiffly, joined by a third man in a dark suit. His expression was unreadable, but the tablet in his hand played a familiar video. Garvin reaching for Solomon, the 6 veterans rising, the room shifting. No audio, no editing, just the truth. "You're both suspended," the man said flatly. "Pending full internal review." Garvin flared. "Wait, seriously? Over one black vet?" The man's tone dropped even colder. Number over one employee who couldn't read a ticket and decided to start a scene with a decorated serviceman while half the room filmed it. "Yes, it's about race, because you didn't remove the white dad in jeans in the next row. You went straight for the man in uniform." Silence, no defense, because now the camera was watching them too, and it wasn't their ally. Outside, after the ceremony, the parking lot buzzed, not with cars leaving, but with people lingering. Solomon stood near the school entrance, back straight, posture unchanged. People approached, not en masse, not like fans, but like folks who just needed to touch something solid. A man in his 40s shook his hand, whispered something with a voice thick with memory. "I've got a son in the service too," he said, "and I worried they wouldn't even let us sit together at his graduation. You showed us how to stay seated and still stand." Solomon just nodded. "No need for speeches." Then Tyron approached, graduation robe still hanging loose, diploma in hand, eyes too full for a teenager. For a while they didn't speak, they just looked. "I thought you might not make it," Tyron said finally. "I gave your mother my word," Solomon answered, "and I don't break promises." The pause wasn't heavy, it was sacred. Then Tyran stepped forward and hugged him. Not the quick tap on the back hug of ceremony, a real embrace. The kind of hug that presses years of silence, loss, and unspoken love into one long, unbroken breath. Off to the side, the 6 veterans stood watch. Not as bodyguards now, just as brothers. Creed, the one with the beard and the sharp wit, looked at the others. "All right," he said. "Now we can grab that drink." They didn't pose for photos, didn't hand out business cards or recount medals. They simply walked toward the parking lot. Their mission was done. Back at the school steps, a high school student still standing by the door posted a short clip on TikTok. In the caption, he wrote, "Today they tried to kick out a black Marine at our graduation. Then 6 men stood up, and everything changed." This wasn't about diplomas. It was about dignity. The next morning, Solomon was awake before the light cracked the horizon. He always was. Some habits don't die. They settle into your bones like the way time wears down stone. He sat on the porch of his small house, wooden planks beneath him creaking as if trying to whisper something back from the past. In one hand, a chipped ceramic mug filled with coffee so dark it looked like it could stare back. The birds chirped like the world was fine. And maybe it was, because in the grand machinery of this country, graduations come and go. Policies are filed and forgotten, and the faces in the crowd are replaced by new ones every year. But for men like Solomon, men who carry silence like armor and memory like a weight, yesterday never really ends. It just settles down into a different part of the soul. He looked at the phone resting next to the cup. It was buzzing nonstop, dozens of notifications, messages from names he hadn't seen in years, fellow Marines, people from back home, strangers whose names meant nothing but whose words suddenly filled his inbox. That TikTok video, the one the kid posted from the bleachers, had exploded. 7.4 million views overnight. More than numbers. These were people. People watching, people learning, maybe even people changing. The comments poured in like a river of digital handshakes. Now that is how a father holds the line. He didn't move. He didn't yell. He just stayed. That's power. Harlan's security better be guarding nothing but vending machines after this. This wasn't a graduation. It was a moment of truth. Solomon turned the Wi-Fi off. Enough. He didn't sit in that chair for followers or attention. He didn't challenge security for likes. He sat there because he paid for that seat, he earned that uniform, and his son deserved to see his father unshaken, unbent, and unbothered. And now he waited for his son to wake up. Tehran came out onto the porch, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The graduation robe was long gone, folded neatly and stored away. He wore shorts and an old t-shirt, but his face, it was different. The boyishness had thinned. Something more defined sat in its place. Like overnight, he'd inherited the quiet gravity of someone who finally understood what it meant to be a man. "You're drinking that stuff black again," Tehran mumbled. "If I want dessert, I'll ask for pie," Solomon replied, not even glancing over. Tehran smirked and sat down next to him. "Yesterday was something." "Don't start," Solomon said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "I knew they'd try something. They always do." A beat passed. The porch settled. "I didn't think you'd come," Tehran said after a while. "After Mom, after everything." "I'll always come," Solomon answered, "even if they lock the doors, even if they shutter the windows. I'll be outside if I have to, but I'll be there." They didn't say anything for a while after that. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full, like a warm blanket passed down through generations. Not awkward, just enough. "You know," Tehran said, eyes watching a bird land on the railing, "when you stood up, the whole place turned, but I didn't see any of them. I just saw you." Solomon nodded slowly. That was the point. Meanwhile, the world turned. Emails flooded Harlan Security's inbox. Lawsuits were whispered about. Boycotts were threatened. Their media team scrambled to post an apology so polished it looked factory-made. "We sincerely apologize to Sergeant Major Dryden for the incident at the graduation ceremony. We have launched an internal investigation and have already taken disciplinary action." A couple of news outlets picked up the story. Talk shows hosted panels. One of them sat a white professor down beside a black civil rights attorney. The professor tried to phrase it gently. This was not necessarily an act of racism per se, but perhaps an institutional miscalibration of threat perception. The attorney looked straight into the camera. "No, Professor, let's not soften this. That was racial profiling. That was systemic bias wrapped in polo shirts and protocol. A man in uniform, seated peacefully, was targeted because he didn't look like the other parents. That's not a miscalibration. That's the sickness we're still living in." And miles away, in a chamber lined with flags and marble, a U.S. senator, himself a retired veteran, included Solomon's story in a speech to Congress. "We cannot claim to honor our servicemen while permitting the removal of black veterans from celebratory events simply because their presence disrupts someone's comfort. That isn't patriotism. That's cowardice." But Solomon wasn't watching. He had other things to do. A week after the ceremony, he drove Tehran to the local Veterans Center. The building was old, its bricks tired, but the inside held a warmth that couldn't be manufactured. It smelled like leather and brewed coffee, and something else, honesty. "You sure?" Tehran asked as they stepped in. "Number, but it's worth knowing," Solomon replied. "You don't have to follow what I did, but you do need to know where it starts." Inside, older men looked up from their chairs. Heads nodded. One voice, raspy like gravel dragged through memory, said loud enough for all to hear, "Well, look who's here, the general of TikTok. Come on in, son." Tehran laughed, not mockingly, but with the kind of relief you feel when the room is safe. They spent the day talking about life, about service, about a country that promises progress but delivers it like rationed heat, slow, conditional. Tehran heard stories that weren't printed in textbooks, of a grandfather who walked to school under armed guard for being the first black student, of a mother turned away from a university despite top marks. He understood then, his father hadn't just stood his ground that night. He stepped into the line, the long, unbroken line of people who refused to vanish. That evening, when they returned home, Solomon opened the mailbox and found a letter, official seal, Elmridge City Council, an invitation. "You have been selected to receive the annual Civic Valor Award in recognition of your composure, dignity, and resilience during a moment that inspired an entire city." He read it once, then tucked it away in a drawer. Not out of rejection, but because what he needed, he already had. Right there on that porch, his son sat beside him, reading, calm, present, not looking for answers, just being, and that meant everything. You were right, Tyran said, flipping a page. About what? Strength isn't in shouting, he said. It's in sitting still when the whole world wants you to move. Solomon nodded, because right then, right there, with the sun setting behind them and the world still buzzing on the other side of the Wi-Fi, both father and son knew. True respect doesn't arrive in speeches or ceremonies. It begins in how you sit when they expect you to disappear.